Mastering cross-cultural research considerations. Cultural ignorance sabotages research validity. When conducting cross-cultural research, what are the primary cultural differences that researchers should be aware of, which could potentially impact the validity of our research findings, and how can we effectively address them to ensure operational excellence? Operational excellence in cross-cultural research requires careful consideration of the primary cultural differences that can impact the validity of research findings. Researchers must be aware of the cultural nuances that can affect the design, implementation, and interpretation of research studies. Failing to address these cultural differences can lead to misleading or inaccurate results, compromising the integrity of the research. One of the most critical cultural differences that researchers should be aware of is language. Language is not just a means of communication but also carries cultural connotations and nuances. Idioms, expressions, and even simple phrases can have different meanings in different cultures. For instance, the phrase "How are you?" is often used as a greeting in Western cultures, but in some African cultures, it is considered impolite to ask about someone's well-being without genuinely caring about their response. To address language differences, researchers can use multiple translation procedures, such as back translation, to ensure that the research instruments are equivalent across languages. Additionally, researchers can use bilingual or multilingual research assistants who are familiar with the cultural context to help with data collection and interpretation. Another cultural difference that researchers should be aware of is individualism versus collectivism. In individualistic cultures, such as those in the United States and Western Europe, people tend to prioritize their personal goals and achievements over group membership. In contrast, in collectivist cultures, such as those in Asia and Africa, people tend to prioritize group harmony and consensus over individual goals. This cultural difference can affect how participants respond to research questions, with individualistic cultures tending to prioritize self-interest and collectivist cultures tending to prioritize group harmony. To address this cultural difference, researchers can use culturally sensitive research instruments that take into account the cultural context. For instance, in collectivist cultures, researchers can use group-level data collection methods, such as focus groups, to tap into the collective perspective. In individualistic cultures, researchers can use individual-level data collection methods, such as surveys, to tap into personal opinions and experiences. Power distance is another cultural difference that researchers should be aware of. Power distance refers to the degree to which people accept and expect power inequality in their society. In high-power distance cultures, such as those in Asia and Africa, people tend to accept and respect authority figures, whereas in low-power distance cultures, such as those in Western Europe and North America, people tend to view authority figures as more equal. To address power distance, researchers can use culturally sensitive research designs that take into account the cultural context. For instance, in high-power distance cultures, researchers can use more formal and structured research designs, such as experimental designs, to demonstrate respect for authority figures. In low-power distance cultures, researchers can use more informal and participatory research designs, such as focus groups, to promote equal participation and discussion. Time orientation is another cultural difference that researchers should be aware of. Time orientation refers to the degree to which people prioritize the past, present, or future. In some cultures, such as those in Africa and Asia, people tend to prioritize the past and tradition, whereas in other cultures, such as those in Western Europe and North America, people tend to prioritize the future and innovation. To address time orientation, researchers can use culturally sensitive research instruments that take into account the cultural context. For instance, in cultures that prioritize the past, researchers can use retrospective research designs that focus on past experiences and events. In cultures that prioritize the future, researchers can use prospective research designs that focus on future plans and expectations. Lastly, researchers should be aware of cultural differences in communication styles. Communication styles can vary significantly across cultures, with some cultures prioritizing direct and assertive communication, whereas others prioritize indirect and harmony-oriented communication. For instance, in some African cultures, communication is often indirect and subtle, with people relying on nonverbal cues and context to convey meaning. To address communication styles, researchers can use culturally sensitive research instruments that take into account the cultural context. For instance, in cultures that prioritize direct and assertive communication, researchers can use more structured and formal research designs, such as surveys, to elicit clear and direct responses. In cultures that prioritize indirect and harmony-oriented communication, researchers can use more informal and unstructured research designs, such as focus groups, to promote free-flowing discussion and negotiation. To ensure operational excellence in cross-cultural research, researchers can adopt several strategies. Firstly, researchers can engage in extensive literature reviews and consultations with cultural experts to gain a deep understanding of the cultural context. Secondly, researchers can use multiple research methods, such as qualitative and quantitative methods, to triangulate findings and increase validity. Thirdly, researchers can use culturally sensitive research instruments and procedures, such as back translation and cultural adaptation, to ensure equivalence and accuracy. Fourthly, researchers can engage in continuous reflexivity and self-awareness, recognizing their own cultural biases and assumptions and taking steps to address them. In conclusion, operational excellence in cross-cultural research requires careful consideration of the primary cultural differences that can impact the validity of research findings. By addressing language, individualism versus collectivism, power distance, time orientation, and communication styles, researchers can increase the accuracy and validity of their findings, ensuring that their research contributes to the advancement of knowledge and understanding across cultures.